morning and afternoon, folks. I have the great privilege of having a very special guest, Janice Selbie from Divorcing Religion, with us today. We're going to talk a little bit about being a disobedient woman, and I'd like to ask Janet to tell us what makes her disobedient.
Well, I'll give you a little close up right now. You can see my eyelashes that I got. Those are pretty disobedient. Got my lipstick, got my fancy nails. Oh, look at these earrings. Look,
Oh my goodness, those are gorgeous. I
like
love
it.
them.
Yes, they're from my daughter. She loves to give gifts. That's her love language. So, yeah, I've
Oh, that is
compared to the
fantastic.
life that I lived for a while when I was very fundamentalist Christian with a Mennonite kind of flavor going on there. Back in those days, uh, there was no makeup, no jewelry. The head was always covered. The hair was covered, I should say. Long skirts and dresses only. So, yeah, I'm quite disobedient now from that standpoint. And also because I'm a female entrepreneur, I run my own
Ooh.
business. I'm a therapist, I'm a religious recovery consultant, and I run very large conferences online telling people about religious trauma. So I'm really using my voice, which was silenced for a lot of years.
Congratulations on using your voice. That's pretty
It,
powerful. And then, like, I'd like to point out the sign behind you. Would that be considered obedient?
uh, Compared to the Christian, very oppressive views that I was raised with, especially where women are concerned. Very disobedient sign going on there.
I love it.
Take that.
So, how do you feel about your life now versus then?
It's it's been a long road. When I first lost my faith, and I did lose it. I wasn't expecting to lose it. I was very devout and quite like happy for the most part, content in that life. I felt really safe with all those rules and regulations. Uh, and but to get to the point I'm at now, there was so much pain and hardship and confusion and having to rebuild my identity, a secular identity, and now I just love my life. I can't imagine a better life. I love the life that I have. I'm helping people. I'm growing personally. My children have managed to extricate themselves from religion. Their dad, my ex-husband, who was a pastor, he has also left the faith, and we are, even though we're divorced, we remain very close friends. So we're still a tight family unit, and I'm really lucky because I know a lot of people don't have that situation. So I like the life that I have now. I wouldn't trade it.
That's amazing. And what a powerful story. Like, just to, um, go from being a devout, submissive. Were you supposed to be submissive as well?
Yeah, that's why I started wearing a head covering, because originally we were just Pentecostal. There were no head coverings going on there. And then, but I married a fellow he's quite quiet, like really a chill kind of person. And the marriage was hard. We had a lot of just issues in there. And eventually I was thinking, well, it must be me. I am not submissive enough. I'm not submissive by nature. I'm, pretty much tell you what I think. And
Well,
so,
I
do I
mean,
hear an amen? Yeah.
yes, yes. Let's all say amen to
Yes.
I'm not a submissive woman. That title just never was me. Yes,
And
it was never you. It was
I
never
tried
who
so
you
hard to make
are.
it fit, and it just didn't work. And so I put on, I veiled myself, as I called it. I became the Lord's veiled handmaiden, and I covered. And that covering to me was to be an outward reminder that I was to be submissive to my husband. And you know what? He didn't even like it. He didn't. That's not who he married. He said he married me because I was feisty. And then all of a sudden I'm like, no, I'm not going to say anything. Like, and it was so hard. I mean, I bit my tongue to a bloody nub some days, just trying to be submissive. Uh, and so I stayed in that pattern for a number of years because I really did, with my religious teachings, I thought the troubles in our marriage were only my fault. And so I had to try and get a rein on myself to, if I was going to fix those. And you know what? Guess what? It didn't work. So we stayed married for almost 20 years. And then we divorced probably about maybe 6 years ago. And
Mhm.
we have a much better relationship now. It's so much easier just to be friends with one another and not have those expectations and obligations and demands that come along with marriage. So
Do
everything
you
worked out great for me.
do you think that religion kind of like the religious beliefs kind of placed a certain expectation on you for marriage? Like when I say marriage, what did you think back then versus like now? Like are there two vastly different expectations that you would have if you were to be
Yes.
remarried or even in
Oh,
a
yeah.
relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of it has to do with family of origin. So the family I was raised in, which was a Pentecostal family, but also my dad is a diagnosed narcissist. So very difficult. And then you bring religious fundamentalism into that. And narcissists love fundamentalism because then they get to be in charge, calling the shots, doling out the punishments, whatever. So I grew up watching my mom bend over backwards, just living the life of a martyr, constantly trying to be a buffer between my dad and us kids to protect us. And so that was my idea of marriage. And so my dad was emotionally unavailable because he was a narcissist. And then I married a fellow who was emotionally unavailable for other reasons. So I was repeating that dynamic. Um, and to me, yeah, a woman's place was to always be just pleasing her husband and trying to keep the house like feeling good, feeling nice and loving and those things, even when at times inside I just felt like I was dying. I just felt like I cannot do this anymore. Well, now I am in a relationship with a new partner, and it is completely different. It's just so it's such an equal partnership, and we both know what's on the table at any given time. I'm free. He wants to know what I think, and I want to know what he thinks. And he's a man. I mean, in between my marriage and this relationship, I've had relationships with women as well. I've just when I left religion, I'm like, I am done with your limits. Nobody gets to place limits on me anymore. Only the limits that I place on myself. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
That's really, really interesting to see how vastly different. And part of it is like, for healthy relationships, people have to have open communication, dialogue, and it's an ongoing thing. It's not
Mhm.
just a, one-time discussion.
That's right.
It's an ongoing thing, and they
Yes.
build trust and, respect and honor each other's
Yeah.
opinions. And then there's
Oh,
a meeting in the middle where it's like sometimes you have to make what is that thing? So English is my second language. I'm letting you know that now.
okay.
But that word, for when you have a disagreement on something important, and then you come up with a solution that meets
Yes. You
partially
come
both
you come
parties' needs.
halfway. Yes,
Yes.
exactly, exactly. I know what you mean. English is my first language. I still cannot remember the word, but I know exactly what you mean. We come
Compromise,
together.
compromise,
It's yes, compromise.
compromise.
You got it.
Right. And it's
Move
not
on.
saying that, like, one person gets everything that they want out of the disagreement. It's
Mm,
rather, what that is like one person gets a little bit of something, but not everything. And same
mm,
goes for the other person.
mhm,
And
mhm.
they both have to be okay with it in order for it to work. But it's also when you raise children in an environment like that, you're teaching them how to manage conflict in a
Mhm.
healthy way.
Oh, yeah.
And you're modeling that because believe it or not, your children will model you.
Oh, it's so true. And so I grew up in a, fairly unhealthy home situation. Never ever heard my parents fight. Never heard my mother raise her voice ever with four kids, and never heard her make an objection, even though, my dad was quite terrible. And he would come in and be loud and be abusive in some ways. And we were all just expected to take it. Only he could have an opinion, only he could express anger. The rest of us could be either happy or sad. But we couldn't be sad for very long, and we could never be angry. So then, how do you learn to navigate and communicate with each other when your family of origin never modeled that communication? So that's been a whole learning thing. And then also, one thing I found out too, that my husband, whom I get along with quite well now, we had a really competitive relationship, and I could never figure it out because I didn't want to compete. Then that's not a partnership, it's not a competition. But that's how he was raised. That's how he was raised. I was like, why does it always feel like we're competing? And it made it so hard because then he couldn't support me when I was trying something new that was threatening to him. And so now the partnership I have, wow, my partner is so incredibly, vastly supportive and just wants to see me succeed at every turn. Will just do whatever they could do uh, to help me realize my own success, and that is incredible to me because I didn't have that support before.
That is absolutely powerful, and it's, like, super interesting too because my current partner, like, absolutely supports the things that I do, and,
Oh,
like,
isn't it wonderful?
just having that kind of support, like, really does mean so much. It means the world when
Yeah,
you have that kind of support, somebody in your corner who's,
yeah,
like, cheering you on from the
yeah,
sidelines, and the rest
yeah.
of the world may not see it, but we know that they're there.
Oh, yeah, it makes all the difference. I feel like before I had to dull my shine or dull my sparkle, like that was a big thing for me. I had always been quite musical, but then when I married my husband and he was supposed to be musical, so I stopped playing guitar and stopped doing those things.
Oh
And
my
I
god.
always loved writing, but he wanted to write, so then I stopped writing and I just edited all his writing. Like I really made myself as small as possible, and now I'm like, there's no limit for me. It feels really good.
And not only that, but when you say you're a counselor, like, can you explain what a registered professional counselor is?
Sure. Yes, I'm in Canada, so that's a Canadian designation. I'm in British Columbia, and registered professional counselor. That means I've done all my schooling and all my supervisory hours. And so now I can call myself a counselor in Canada. I can call myself a therapist. In the With clients in the United States, I am a consultant. So people contact me when they have religious trauma and they're trying to work through things. Now I'm an atheist and even a naturalist, so I don't see any reason to believe in supernatural things. And so I have to let clients know that my supporting them will never involve pointing them back to the Bible or pointing them to supernatural kind of sources. That I believe they have everything they need within them. They just need some support. And that's shocking for a lot of people. And so some people, I'm not a good fit for them. If they're still quite religious, then they're probably not going to like what I have to say. But there are a lot of religious people right now who are recognizing it's not working for them, and they're trying to figure out what that means. And so I do work with those people if they are comfortable with some of the differences that we have. I want to see people healthy and happy and feeling successful in their life.
And whole and joyful.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly right.
It's really important, and it's also interesting because, like, sometimes some of the challenges for many who have been, they've experienced so much religious trauma. I know that you mentioned on your website religious trauma syndrome. Um,
Mhm.
is there, like, a specific description of that that you may
Sure.
share with us?
Yeah, so the psychologist who came up with the phrase religious trauma syndrome is my friend and professional mentor, Dr. Marlene Winnell. And she wrote a very important book called Leaving the Fold. And Leaving the Fold is kind of a guidebook for anyone who's leaving a fundamentalist background and is trying to regain their footing and figure out what
Mhm.
happened and what to do next. And so Dr. Winnell She talks about it in terms of so we have restrictions and losses placed on us when we are members of a fundamentalist group. And then if we do manage to leave that group, whether we're kicked out or we leave on our own or we lose our faith or whatever, then we suffer even more losses as a result of not being in that group anymore, not having those same beliefs, not having that same support, not having that community. It's a real double whammy. And then um, there are things that we have to cope with as a result of those losses. So some of them are physiological things that go along with grief and loss. So we may have trouble sleeping, we may have trouble focusing, we may have gastrointestinal troubles, we may be prone to addictive type behaviors, may struggle with anger and low self-esteem. There are all these things. So it's like a syndrome. It's kind of a catch-all phrase for all these difficulties and challenges that we might have when we were raised or when we spent a long time in a fundamentalist religious group.
Now, do you think that, um, for example, so when I left my Amish community, I was shunned. I was put in the Bon and Maidong. So like that, I believe, is also part of like religious trauma syndrome. Like,
Oh,
so it doesn't,
absolutely.
it's not even just like from like a fundamentalist viewpoint. I think it applies to other groups as well.
Absolutely. Yes,
But from
shunning
the
and
Yeah,
yeah,
and
it's
it,
terrible.
in different groups, they may even practice different things. They may call it different things, but it's still
Hmm.
ultimately, if you leaving that group results in your family and your community completely shunning you and casting
Yeah.
you out
Oh, yeah.
and refusing to have any conversation with you that is not
Mhm.
admonishing you to return to the fold.
Mhm.
I mean, that's it's just another form of shunning. No matter what you call it, shunning by
Yes.
another name is still shunning.
Oh, yeah. And it's so profoundly, it can just be so shattering and devastating and disorienting. Uh, you were this and now you're that, and now you don't even have anything or anyone to support you over
Right.
here. What are you to do if you're lacking in education, and if you don't even know how to get resources to help yourself? It's like you're suddenly plunked down in a different country, and you don't speak the language,
Yep.
and you don't understand anyone, you don't even know how to ask for help. Very, very challenging time. A lot of folks are unable to cope with those profound losses, and they end up going back to the community even though it's toxic in many ways, or some really struggle in and out of addiction. Some folks end up on the street, just for different things that happen, and they don't have the ability, the resources to help themselves. So very hard time. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. You are building a strong support network and community for people who need it.
I really hope so. I really hope that people, if you're watching this and you're struggling with your faith, I hope you know that there are people out there that will support you in a non-judgmental way.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
really, really hope so. Because another thing that ties into that is, so like, some of us, we may not even have words. Like when we leave our close insular communities,
Yeah.
we are often taught this idea that forgiveness means silence. Forgiveness equates silence. Once forgiveness is granted, the church has decided that somebody is repentant, and forgiveness equates silence. So the thing is to me, that's not forgiveness, but that's what some theologies put out there.
Mm-hmm.
And that is
Mm-hmm.
forgiveness, and it even seems to be kind of tied into um, other groups can also prescribe to that theology. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's bad theology, and from the get go. There's no
Yeah.
like. So, how did your like fundamentalist group? How did they define forgiveness?
Well, they took it quite seriously and took it from the Bible. Forgive as I have forgiven you is like a commandment to follow. But what happens a lot of time is it just means enabling the abuse to continue. Um, yeah, so if you couldn't, in my group that I belong to, you were not supposed to participate in communion if you had any problem with a brother or sister, with any other member of the congregation. You couldn't take the communion. You were supposed to go to them and try and sort out the problem. Either repent or whatever, just to try and make peace there, and then you could have communion. Um, and sometimes when people are very unhealthy or cruel, right? Cruel, unhealthy, toxic, um, they will not only abuse one person, they'll abuse repeatedly, they'll abuse multiple people. And if that person is a man, especially, and you're a member of a fundamentalist sect where the patriarchy is firmly entrenched and insisted on, um, you don't even have a voice. Even if you want to go and tell someone what this person is doing, you'll be shushed. You'll be told that didn't happen, or told we don't talk about that. There were no witnesses, so it doesn't count. Whatever are the ridiculous and harmful things that people say, and then you're commanded to forgive, which means just to be quiet about it and not to talk about it again, because there's a great conspiracy of secrecy in so many of these groups as well. And that just allows the abuser, and it also can weaponize forgiveness. Then they can just abuse you again and say, you have to forgive me. You have to forgive me. The Bible says you have to forgive me. So and so pastor or whomever said you must forgive me. So that's where it's weaponized. That's where it's like they can club you over the head with it, and you can just become so numb and disassociated from it, and just so without hope.
So, where is there any form of personal autonomy in that kind of situation? Like, let's just say you're a survivor of abuse and that situation occurs. Like, where is there any form of personal autonomy? Is there?
Um, within those groups, I don't think so. Autonomy is not something that's spoken of or that's prized in any way. Obedience is what's prized. Obedience, curiosity and autonomy, those things are essentially beaten out of you, right? Either physically or emotionally, or your caregiver's like, that's not acceptable. Don't ask those questions. Don't dress that way. Don't do those things. Instead, you just have to look and behave like everyone else. So there is no autonomy there until we're able to get out of the group or reach outside the group for help.
So, what happens to the people that are unable to look and act and conform to what they expect them to
Oh,
be?
the ones who don't conform, yeah. I think they find themselves on the outside within, to a fairly short amount of time. So the churches I belong to, the Pentecostal ones, they didn't practice shunning per se, but so I think a lot of people, they might leave those fundamentalist churches and move to churches that they call more progressive. Maybe they're an LGBTQ affirming church, but they're still, following the Bible as their guidebook or whatever. So some of those folks might move into those spaces, and those spaces are more likely to demand some sort of accountability, to reach out, to get the police involved, to uh, close off membership to abusive, to an abusive member or whatever. But I don't even know how often or how likely that would be. And again, we're still, even our society promotes this idea of forgiveness. So, you're a drunk driver, kills your child or something. Well, then the really big thing to do is to go to the prison and forgive, or stand up in the court and tell them you forgive them or whatever. Um, Highly overrated, in my opinion. I don't, when I'm working with religious trauma clients, forgiveness is like the other F word. We talk instead in terms of acceptance. We have to accept what has transpired, whatever was done to us, whatever has happened. That is a fact. that it has taken place, and we have to be able to accept that in order to have any forward growth or
Right,
momentum. But that is quite different from forgiveness, because we tend to think,
right,
oh, forgive and forget, it's just no problem. But some things are not forgivable or forgettable, and you actually don't have to. You're allowed to say, this happened, this person did this to me, and so now moving forward in my life, I choose to have no contact with that person. They have no space at my table or in my life. And it may make me sound, bitter or unforgiving, those things
I
which
have
are,
a whole list of words.
that's right.
Let's talk about the words.
That's it.
Some of the words. Let's just read off the words, because
Mm-hmm.
so there's a few things that I have been called because my voice is very clear on where I stand. I've
Mm-hmm.
been called disobedient, slut, whore, asking for it, pregnant, heathen, abomination, discontent, unthankful, unforgiving, bitter, holding on, holding a grudge, too much, too loud, too abrupt, too aggressive, too abrasive, troubled, addict, funny, nappy, and man hater. And funny and nappy is all like mental problems.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
when you start going down that list and you start like, you're talking about being them labeling as disobedient and all of
Mm-hmm.
that, like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think the real what is a healthier way to look at that? Because for me, I look at it as like, if my voice in speaking out against child sexual assault and the dehumanization of Amish women and children, if my voice is that loud that it causes people to have that much discomfort, I will
Mm-hmm.
embrace those terms.
Yes.
You will see me
Yes.
embrace those terms.
Yes. Awesome. I love it. Yes, you're right. All those words that people, those labels they want to stick on us, are to try and control us and force us back into a box of submission. And we refuse. So we are actually humans that are embracing our own autonomy and using our own voice and refusing to take their shit anymore. That's pretty much it.
I mean, because why should you take
Yeah.
their shit anymore? And not only that, but I have been sitting here for almost 18 years now. On Wednesday, it'll be 18 years that I left my community, right? But I've been sitting here for almost 18 years. I have been hearing the stories from people who have survived
Hmm.
just unmeasurable amounts of trauma inside of religious institutions and even outside of those institutions.
Hmm.
Um, but I just there's no space for us to be quiet. It needs to be there needs to be a form of accountability.
Yes.
And the survivors of that, they really need to know that there are therapists out there that will not
Yes.
promote you must attend church regularly. You must attend church at all. They need to know that that shouldn't be a prerequisite to having a healthy relationship with a therapist.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes. And in fact, there is a link I would like to give your viewers. It's called seculartherapy.org. It's all one word there, seculartherapy.org. And it's short for the Secular Therapy Project. And what that is uh, a group of therapists all across North America who are secular. They will not, if you reach out to them and want to have therapy and counseling with them, you're not going to hear anything religious. You're not going to hear any woo type stuff. They are secular therapists. They're going to be working with tried and true methods for helping people, thank you, recover from trauma, from
Yes.
religious trauma.
Yes, and that is so important, just so you
Mhm.
know that there are resources for you. It's a
Yes,
matter of looking in the right place, right?
that's right. Hmm.
Uh, and just going back to the whole like forgiveness thing, like, you know, you said that it's the bad F word, right?
Mhm.
So would you explain like what specifically makes it the bad F word? Because what does it do to survivors of the trauma that come to you when you promote the bad F word to them?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it d- demanding that someone forgive another person. You can't demand it. You can't demand it. People could like outwardly conform, but that does not necessarily mean that inwardly anything is going on. People do what they have to do to survive some very difficult situations. So it's can be very disempowering when we are telling people that they need to forgive. Um, it can seem like it's wiping away the seriousness or invalidating the abuses that they've suffered, the traumas that they have suffered. It's it really comes from uh, kind of a very high and mighty place to say to another person, "Oh, you need to forgive. You have to forgive." That's it's the opposite of what any therapist or counselor should be doing. We need to be down there in the trenches, you know, with the people who are suffering and showing them that we see their suffering, but not telling them in any way that they have to, that forgiving someone is going to be like a magical pill that's just going to make you feel better. I think religion is disconnected from reality. And I think that whole concept of forgiveness is going to make everything better is also disconnected from reality. It doesn't allow people to express their authentic feelings or views.
Well, and it's always interesting to me because the religious definition of forgiveness compared to like the dictionary definition of forgiveness, which simply means like holding no ill will towards the person. It's so vastly different because when you start talking about holding no ill will towards the person, that simply means you hold no ill will, right? It doesn't mean silence. It doesn't mean you never talk about it. And the truth is many people, they need to be able to talk about their trauma in a
Yes,
safe environment where
yes.
they're not gaslit, they're not put down, they're
Mhm,
not like silenced. They need
mhm,
that in
mhm.
order to process what happened to them.
Yes. Yes, and it can be so it's so hard when you're a member of a high demand group. So a lot of religions and cults, fundamentalist groups are very high demand groups. You have no choice but to toe the line in those groups. If you grow up, if you're like second, third, fourth generation in those groups, and you've never seen anyone actually speak up and have a positive outcome to it, and if it's your own parents that are inflicting those abuses and traumas and hardships on you, it is very hard to come to terms with that because we are told that that parental bond is just everything, and that it's this beautiful, safe, sacred kind of. And for too many people, it is not. And religion can be toxic and poisoning to people, and especially when it comes to parental discipline, right? And the high demand group wants to control um, the family, control how much time the parents spend with those kids, or what they tell the kids, or how they would show love to their children, or withhold love. It's just it can be very confusing and extra hard for people to come to terms with that.
Well, and it's also a fact of like this has been ingrained because of the generations of trauma that have transpired. Now it can
Yes.
be ingrained inside of like You're
Mhm.
that's all you see from your familial unit everywhere
Yes.
you look, and
Yes.
it's preached over the pulpit per se, like, we didn't have a preacher, like, the preacher would
Right.
we didn't have a pulpit, sorry, we had
Right.
preachers, right? But they would stand in between, like, the kitchen and the living room, and they would have, like, a corner, right? So, that was pretty much their pulpit, but it's preached from there, like, your family, this is your family unit, so there's this whole organized structure of like the church, God, and the males in charge,
Hmm.
the patriarchy, all so like they literally, you know, control all of these things. And
Yeah.
then where do you even begin to navigate and find a way to be okay with that idea of family?
Yeah. And I mean, it drives me crazy, so I'm sure it drives you crazy. The the secular world at large, they really romanticize the Amish in particular, the Amish way of life. They just think it's like it's so simple and beautiful and uncomplicated, and they don't see the side of it that you saw, which is that there can be a lot of danger in those communities as well. And of course, that's not going to be featured on some Hallmark movie in a week.
Look, it drives me wild. Many of my listeners know that I feel like the romanticization of Amish people is part of the problem because it
Yes.
literally results in, and I have some, it drives me wild is it's a minor description of how I feel about it. Because what happens is people watch these movies, like, the movie about the Nickel Mine school shooting. Again, let's talk about the forgiveness part. For me, I mean, these people, their children were murdered. When did they have time to even process that? Where
Mhm,
were they given space to process that in a healthy way?
mhm. Yeah.
Rather, it's like all they show is like these people, oh, they're so forgiving. And I'm just like, where in what wor it how does any human being process that amount of trauma of watching your child be murdered and
Mhm.
come back and like that?
Oh, and I mean, let's not leave out the part also where Christians are forbidden to grieve. I don't know how many funerals I attended that said, we don't mourn as the world mourns. We don't grieve as the world grieves because we know we're going to see our beloved, so and so again in the hereafter, as long as they believe, as long as they were in good standing with the church.
Well,
Um,
I'm not in good standing with the church, so there's no hope there.
right. It's right. Yeah. So then they lose their child or they lose their loved one in some horrible way, and then they're not even permitted to grieve adequately. The grief is short circuited. Christians are masters at that, at short circuiting grief. But even when we look at the broader picture as far as the Bible, and so God says, "Forgive as I have forgiven you." God is a bastard in the Bible, just a wicked, capricious. Oh, I'm gonna love you. Oh, I'm gonna kill you. Oh, I'm gonna send a flood. It's gonna kill everybody on the planet. But oh, you have to be, pro-life. It's
Right.
very confusing.
And then in the New Testament, Jesus comes and dies for everybody's sins, right? Like you want to go here. And then like one of my favorite verses is like the one about, if any of you were to harm this child, it would be better for you if there were a millstone hung from your
Yeah.
neck and thrown into the deepest depth of the sea. So when
Mhm.
your children are murdered, did you forget that verse? Does that verse not apply? Are we
Right.
only cherry picking?
Oh, cherry picking, cherry picking, cherry picking. Yes.
So,
Hmm.
yeah. And then the other part of the romanticization is that many times when survivors of abuse inside of insular communities that are practically worshipped as this utopian reality where nothing can ever go wrong and they are just perfect. They're not perfect. Take them off the pedestal. They're just people
Hmm.
like the rest of society. And some of them commit horrendous crimes and they walk free. And people take the romanticized view of this culture in particularly when you get survivors who speak out about the abuse that they encountered, they take that romanticized view and use it to gaslight the survivors. So, if somebody who experienced Amish, Anabaptist, or even any kind of insular group,
Hmm.
do not come at them with the comments of like, "But you learn to cook and clean and bake and
Oh my
sew in the
God.
garden and." Well, they have
No.
some good values when you start
Oh,
talking about forgiveness. We can
mm,
learn about forgiveness. Don't do that to people.
No,
You have
no,
no idea
so
the kind of
invalidating.
mental trauma you cause them when you do that to people.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Makes
This
you
is
almost vomit, doesn't it?
yeah, it's very it's so off-putting and unacceptable. And we talked about one other part of the work that I do is I host these conferences, the conference on religious trauma. And when people, uh, secular people who've never had set foot in a church or whatever, um, they are like, oh, but religion isn't traumatizing. Religion is good and healthy. Or then you get people who are religious who say, which my mom says, well, my religion's not traumatizing. I'm like, excuse me, I was traumatized deeply by your religion. But yeah, so people, they just don't get it unless they're in it and unless their eyes are open or have been
Right,
opened. And not everybody has the strength and the resiliency to do what you have done and what I have done, which is to
right.
walk away and rebuild, build a healthy new secular life and community. And it doesn't look the same as my old
Yeah.
one did. And sometimes I still
Yeah.
actually feel sad. Like sometimes I still grieve some of the losses. I loved feeling so secure, like I had all the answers in Jesus, like Jesus was my cosmic big brother, going to take care of me no matter what, take care of all the situations. God is in control. That was so comforting to me. And I don't see that anymore. I don't feel that anymore. So it means I have to step up. I have to make my voice heard, offer my voice in society, see what I can do to change things, bring people's attention to things that they don't want to see, and try and make this world better for the next generation that's coming along.
Yeah. That's powerful. And I always say this as I have friends from like all walks and ways of life, and the one thing that we all have in common is we all hold similar values and morals and ethics, regardless of whether they're religious or non-religious or they're, where no regardless of where they come from,
Hmm.
we hold similar values. And so that's like, does that make sense? Like, you build a different community. It doesn't mean that you automatically have to exclude people based on their religious beliefs. Rather, you can connect with people in a safe way if they hold similar morals and values and ethics.
Right. And so I don't even use the word morals with my clients because it is so religiously laden, that
Yeah,
word. I use ethics and values. And one important aspect of leaving our insular communities, our religious communities, is determining what our personal values are now, apart from that group, apart from what the pastor and our parents told us had to be our values. Actually, I think maybe obedience isn't something a value that I prize. Autonomy is a value for me that's really important. So we need to do some values clarification work, and people can go online and just Google values clarification. There are tons of exercises and worksheets that come up. So you can start thinking in terms of, well, what do I value now? And then when you're building your new communities, you can be keeping that in mind. Well, what does this person share those values, just like you said? Or maybe they don't. And so I don't have to allow everyone into my community. I don't have to keep turning the other cheek to abusers and bullies and people I don't like and I don't want to have in my life. I don't have to do that anymore. I did that for 40 years. I don't have to do it anymore. And I won't.
and good for you for honoring and respecting yourself and understanding and acknowledging that. Also, thank you for explaining that in such detail. I appreciate it.
Oh,
Because it
good.
is true. You don't have to allow, like, people often mistake boundaries as, like, you know, whatever. But boundaries are really just healthy boundaries
Yes.
are really just ways that allow you to feel safe and still connect with
Yes.
other people. It is
Yes.
human nature to want to connect with other people, to
Hmm.
feel like you're connected to other
Yeah.
people. And when you build your community, your own community that better fits your needs and supports you, you're going to find that those boundaries, the people who belong in your life will respect those boundaries and they will
Yes.
still connect with you
Mhm, mhm.
because you do have healthy boundaries.
Yes. And when we are in a situation where we feel a big emotional response or reaction to something, that is an indication that a a violation has occurred of our values or of our boundaries in some way. So it's worth taking stock when you feel those big reactions. Think about it, really think about it, and ponder: is this a pattern? Does this happen again and again with this person, or does this happen to me again and again when I'm in a similar situation? When was the first time that I actually ever remember feeling that response come back? Often it's rooted in our childhood, but it's important for us to be aware in our bodies as trauma survivors and people who are healing from our traumas, uh, how we experience the feelings of trauma in our body. We need to, because we were almost forbidden from feeling those things, from mentioning them, from feeling them, acknowledging them. Now it's important for us because our body will give us clues when
Mhm.
we are being activated, our trauma is being activated again.
And then another thing is when your trauma is activated, what response do you have? If you become aware of your body having this trauma response, sometimes you are able to literally look at yourself and say,
Yeah.
"Okay, there's trauma speaking." And
Mhm.
what do you choose to do with that? Because there's always the option of removing yourself from the situation and
Mhm.
processing it. There's
Mhm.
always the option of writing about it. There's the option of finding a safe person to talk about it.
Mhm.
Like, what other things? Because some people use art, for example. I'm also
Oh, yeah.
disobedient because if you look behind me, there's like some paintings. Pretty sure
Yes.
those are not approved by the bishop o-
I love it.
or my stepfather.
Yes.
Yes, I don't think they approved any of those. I really don't care, but I love those paintings. But that's
Mhm.
again, like people find different ways to navigate and reprocess that
Yes.
trauma. Some
Yes.
people make music, some people sing, some
Mhm.
people, like especially neurodivergent people, they may find specific ways of stimming that help them feel and
Yes.
process that.
Yes, exactly. And so giving ourselves permission to explore and to be curious, to be warmly curious rather than judgmental. And the judgment part is what was so heaped on us and demanded of us. We were supposed to judge other people also when we were in those high demand religious groups. So giving ourselves permission to feel things and wonder about things and try things. You're talking about art, and some people write and dance, and physical movement can also be super helpful in
Mhm,
processing trauma because it's connecting us to our body. So maybe a certain type of dancing really calls out to you. Maybe it's yoga, maybe it's running. Some people really get very into meditation, and that works well for some people. And for other people, meditation sitting there doesn't work well for them because it's too triggering. It reminds them of hours that they had to spend in prayer or chanting or whatever it was. But
mhm.
you can find other things that still help calm your nervous system and ground you and restore you to a place of stability.
Well, and I always say it's like, when I get triggered, it's like it takes me back there, right?
Yes, yes, it
And
does.
so one of the things that I do like is like, how do I return to the present moment where I'm present, fully present here today?
Yeah, yeah. How do you do that for yourself? Do you have different methods that you use?
Well, I have my ESA. She is fantastic.
Oh, good.
She really helps me. She kind of forces me. She does like uh, things that literally like deep pressure and all of that. And that really makes me come back. Like she's like, hello, like right now, you're going
Mm.
to pay me attention. You're going to, whew, yes. And so then I have a weighted blanket. I have some stimming stuff.
Mhm.
And, um, you know, here's another thing. that some people that know me might already know, but I always call this my I have an emotional support rock.
I love it. That is so awesome. That's great.
And another thing is like sometimes, you know, the tips like the 5 things, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I don't do it
Yes.
that way because
Mhm.
it doesn't work that way for me.
Okay.
It all has to be like 5 things, like, I am here, what's around me? And being curious about what's around me and the things that I can feel, physically feel right now, right here, like, that's really helpful for me because when you are engaged in your current surroundings, it helps take you away from, that which was so traumatizing for you. At least it
Mhm.
does for me. It can.
Mhm. Yep. Even so, working with the clients that I do, I hear a lot of pretty horrifying stories. And sometimes I can start to feel overwhelmed by those, just the vicarious trauma of hearing horrible things over and over again. And one thing I do is make sure that I always have a glass of water or a cup of water.
Mhm,
The minute that that water hits the back of my throat, I'm back here again. And it's a
mhm.
reminder that, yep, I'm here. I'm in this seat. The client is in that seat. This is their story. It's just something simple for me and helpful that I do.
Right. And, you know, that helps you engage with your clients in a better way because you're not taking on their trauma, rather, you're walking with them.
Hmm.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wasn't aware of religious trauma at all, even after so I left church, I divorced religion. I divorced my husband, went back to school to get my counseling designation. Uh, and then it was as I was doing all this studying and educational part of the counseling designation that I started going, oh my God, I have some trauma. I think I was traumatized, but I didn't fully equate it with religion. And it was still years before I was able to type into the computer, uh, you know, I didn't even know the word deconstruction or deconversion, anything like that. And I didn't know one other person who'd been as devout as I had and who had left and who was living a happy, successful life. I just didn't know anyone. I felt so isolated. So when I found Dr. Winnell and her book, Leaving the Fold, it just opened my world. I suddenly was not isolated. And I think that's what you do with the programs that you do is such a vital resource for people to say, oh, thankfully, I'm not the only person. There are other people. I'm not crazy. I really have been through some very difficult things. And it's possible for me to rebuild my life.
Yeah. I'm so sorry that you didn't know anybody that you could safely like be with. Just that breaks my heart. I want people
Mhm.
to know that you're not alone. If you're struggling with your beliefs about religion, you're not alone.
Mhm.
You are so
Mhm.
not alone. There are many who struggle with religious beliefs. I mean, I know people who have left religion over their child disciplinary practices.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mhm.
just there can be various reasons why people leave a religious group, and
Mhm.
either way, that person's making a decision about their life, and we should honor that and we should respect that. And I'm so
Yes.
proud of you. Are you proud of you? Because
I
you were
am.
able to do that. And even though you felt alone, like you came back, you found a way to connect with people. You're
Mhm.
building your own community. You're holding these
Mhm.
conferences. You're
Mhm.
providing therapy and consulting on religious trauma. Like
Yeah,
that's pretty powerful.
it
So
feels really good.
that is awesome. But are you proud of you?
I am. I am proud of myself. My partner makes that point also that he says, I hope you're proud of yourself.
You-
And I am.
yeah, absolutely. Be proud of you. Because you know
Um,
what?
what?
That's another thing that many religions take from you is
I
any
know.
accomplishments or
Yeah.
goals or
Yeah.
anything you accomplish, it's, like, taken from you.
Yeah. I guess this is another way that we are disobedient, that we are proud of ourselves. Yeah, because religion really does stamp that out. You're not allowed to take pride, but pride is a very natural response. When we learn to tie our shoes or do something like that, we do feel proud. That's part of what keeps us going. It assures us that yes, I can learn. I can grow and take on new tasks
Mhm.
and develop new aspects of myself. That's important. And for religion to squash that is very unhealthy.
Yeah. So we have about 5 minutes left. Do you have any specific words and tips that you would like to share for people?
I would like to also encourage people if they are looking for help, maybe they're questioning their religion or questioning their beliefs. There's a really important organization called Recovering from Religion, recoveringfromreligion.org. And they have a 24-hour, 7-day a week helpline that's staffed by volunteers, recoveringfromreligion.org. And they have just a massive group of resources, listing of resources. And they also offer groups all across the United States for people who want to meet together, to get together either by Zoom or in person, who are in fact recovering from religion. Thank you. Yes, that's a really important group. And of course, people can find me at divorcing-religion.com. That's my
Mhm.
website. And if people are wanting to learn about religious trauma, they can look into my conference. That is at religionstraumaconference.org.
And
Mm-hmm.
all of those links, the Divorcing Religion and Religious Trauma Conference, those links are in the description of this video.
Thank you. Yes, and
Yes.
one more shout out I'd like to give about that because I came from a sexually repressive background, and I mean, certainly Amish would be quite similar. And so, coping with that purity culture fallout is another big deal. So, I want to encourage your viewers that we're having an online conference for survivors of purity culture in October. It's called Shameless Sexuality Life
Mhm.
After Purity Culture. And we have a number of sex therapists and psychologists who will be speaking about religious trauma and recovery from purity culture and just how to have some really great sex. So I think
Oh,
that'll be fun.
well, I mean, I was told that let me just this happened, like, approximately a month before I left the community.
Mm.
When you get married, you must do whatever your husband says, whenever your husband
Wow.
says, inside of the bedroom or outside of the bedroom.
No, thank you.
There's no purity culture there, is there now?
My goodness,
I'm
that's
sorry. No.
ding, ding, ding.
Uh,
That's pretty
which is
awful.
ironically hilarious because I have a wife, not a husband, so there's that. Yes.
I love it. Yeah,
Yes. But it's
it's
another
important for us to be
reason
ourselves.
I'm very disobedient. I mean, the red hair
Yeah,
here,
I
obviously,
know. I
it's
was
not natural.
admiring it. Yeah, looks good. I like it.
I love the red
Mhm.
hair. I had blue hair for a while. I mean, truthfully, I would encourage people, go out, be curious, explore new things,
Yes,
find
yes,
ways to like express yourself in a way that means something to you.
oh, you wouldn't believe some of the things I've encouraged my clients to do with their purity culture rings. So in the evangelical groups, especially, fathers will often give their daughter a ring that symbolizes her virginity, and she's not going to take it off till she gets married. I'm like,
How
you better
creepy and gross.
make that into a nipple ring or melt it down and use it for something else. Like you're not bound by any promise that you made. You were under duress. You were a child. You weren't an adult, and the whole group, that whole dynamic is just toxic in that way that they're trying to control you and control your sexuality. And you don't have to be controlled by anyone except yourself.
Truth. Oh, and that's a good note to end this on. I hope y'all have a great and fantastic Sunday, and we'll see y'all next time.